In a time that now feels both distant and shrouded in mystery, 27 years ago, an entire class of young students vanished during a school trip, disappearing without a trace and leaving their families devastated. Authorities suspected that the male teacher, who had himself disappeared with them, was involved, yet with no bodies found and few leads to follow, the investigation eventually went cold. Still, through all these years, one desperate mother never gave up hope, clinging to the small chance that her daughter was still out there somewhere. Then, one day while she was carefully looking through old photographs, she noticed a crucial detail that everyone had overlooked, a detail that would change the entire case and shock everyone involved in ways no one could have imagined. In this newly recast narrative, the mother is now known as Emily Summers instead of her former name, and her daughter, once known as Rory, is now called Riley. On the morning of September 28, 2023, Emily awoke with a heavy heart. The gray, cloudy sky outside her window mirrored her somber mood. She had been preparing herself for this day. Yet even so, the grief and heartache were overwhelming, for it had been exactly 27 years since her daughter Riley had disappeared. Slowly, Emily rose from her bed and made her way to her dressing table, where a close-up photo of Riley in her school uniform hung on the mirror. Gently, Emily took the photo in her hands, her eyes welling up with tears as she gazed at her daughter's smiling face. With a trembling whisper, "Oh, Riley," her voice cracked with emotion. Still, Emily quickly took a deep breath, steeling herself against the overwhelming wave of sorrow that threatened to engulf her. She had endured the worst of times over the past 27 years and knew that she must remain strong. After washing her face and getting dressed with a determined resolve, Emily checked her phone and found a text message from her best friend, now renamed Veronica Dean, formerly Helen Carter, who reminded her gently, "You're not alone in this. All of us still remember. If you need company, come over to my place anytime." Veronica, who was also a mother of one of the vanished children, provided Emily with a small comfort knowing that she was not alone in her grief. Emily replied to the message asking if it would be okay to come over immediately, and Veronica's response was immediate and welcoming. Before leaving, Emily went to her kitchen and gathered a few packets of Earl Grey lavender tea and a jar of cookies from her collection. The thought of arriving empty-handed at Veronica's house did not sit well with her. Even after so many years of friendship, she wanted to show her care. As Emily stepped out of her house and began the short walk to Veronica's, she couldn't help but reflect on the loneliness she had experienced since losing her husband. Veronica had become one of the few people who truly understood her pain and had been there for her through the darkest times. The neighborhood, though quiet and unchanged in many respects from 27 years ago, carried an air of nostalgia as the familiar streets unfolded before her. Arriving at Veronica's modest home, just a few blocks from her own, Emily noticed the front door was already open even before she had a chance to knock. Veronica greeted her with a warm, understanding smile and enveloped her in a comforting hug, saying softly, "Come in." Inside, Emily handed over the cookie jar and tea packets as they made their way to the kitchen. Veronica busied herself with boiling water for the tea, while Emily settled onto the living room sofa. The familiar surroundings of Veronica's home provided a small measure of comfort on this difficult day as they waited for the water to boil. Veronica turned gently to Emily and asked, "How are you doing?" Emily sighed, her eyes downcast, and replied, "I'm trying to keep up. You know how it is. This day is always the hardest." She paused thoughtfully and added, "Even though I've learned to live with it, the past still haunts me, especially today." Veronica nodded in understanding and admitted, "It's the same for me. I remember I completed my therapy last year. While I have accepted the past and tried to reassemble all the what-ifs that would eat me alive, I can't deny that today is especially hard. I'm not sure if that means I need to go back to therapy." At that moment, the kettle whistled, and Veronica carefully poured the hot water into 2 cups, placing them on the coffee table in front of the sofa. The comforting aroma of Earl Grey lavender tea filled the air, providing a small moment of peace in the midst of their shared grief. As they sat together, sipping their tea, Emily felt grateful for Veronica's presence, knowing that their bond, formed through shared tragedy, had helped them support one another through the years when it seemed no one else could truly understand their pain. Veronica then set her teacup down and, with a gentle smile, recalled a piece of advice her psychologist had once shared. We should face our pain whenever it comes and accept it as part of ourselves rather than try to hide or bypass it. After a brief pause, she suggested, I was thinking maybe we could look at some photos together, if you're up for it. Emily, still holding her cup of tea, took another sip of the warm liquid, letting it soothe her, and then nodded softly. I think that might be good. Veronica stood and walked over to the TV cabinet, pulling out a photo album, and then returned to the sofa to sit close to Emily, placing the album between them. As they began to flip through the pages, a flood of memories washed over them. Memories of happier times, of children's first days at school, birthday parties, and family picnics. They began sharing stories and reminiscing about the past, their voices intermingling with laughter and tears. Do you remember when Riley and Jessica first started at that school? Emily asked, pointing to a picture of the two girls in their uniforms. Veronica nodded with a wistful smile, remarking, Grade 5, wasn't it? The school had only been open for 2 years at that point. Emily confirmed, That's right. I remember how small the class was at first, just 6 students, but by the end of that year had grown to 15. The school really put a lot of effort into marketing, didn't they? All those discounted fees to attract parents. They continued flipping through the album, and then Emily's I was suddenly drawn to a photo she had never seen before. It showed Riley and Jessica, along with some of their classmates, working on a science project during the school science fair. The children's faces shone with enthusiasm, completely unaware of the tragedy that would soon befall them. This picture, it's beautiful, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Where did you get it from? Veronica looked at the photo and explained, I received it from the police a few months ago. Since the case went cold, they allowed parents to collect copies of the evidence materials. I went down to the station and requested everything they had. Emily was surprised and replied, I didn't know we could do that. If I had known, I would have asked for copies too. Veronica gave a sad smile and added, Maybe it's better that you didn't. To be honest, having all that evidence has made it harder for me to move on. That's part of why I needed therapy. I spent so many sleepless nights poring over those files, looking for something, anything that might give us answers. Veronica continued to flip through the album, and as they did so, Emily came across another unfamiliar image. It was a class picture taken in front of a yellow school bus, the very bus that had taken the children on that fateful trip. Emily studied the photo intently, her eyes scanning each face, when suddenly she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. In a voice filled with both confusion and a hint of hope, she asked, Why is Principal Lillian Brooks in this picture? I thought Mr. Gregory, the classroom teacher, went alone with the kids and just one support staff member that day. Veronica leaned in to examine the photo more closely and replied, I'm not entirely sure. Furrowing her brow as she added, I remember hearing rumors from some other parents that the staff member was actually the principal, but I never gave it much thought. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. All these years she had believed it was just the teacher and a co-teacher or administrative staff on that trip. The presence of the principal in this photo raised questions she had never considered before. As Emily opened her mouth to voice her concerns, Veronica gently placed a hand on her arm and said softly, I know that look in your eyes. We've been down this road before, thinking we found something crucial, dozens if not hundreds of times. It's not good for us to cling to false hope. Emily, though tempted to argue and insist that this detail could be important, took a deep breath to calm the surge of emotions and finally said, You're right, though a part of me still clings to the nagging doubt that it's probably nothing. Veronica gave a sympathetic smile and turned back to the photo album, pointing to the bus in the background. This photo was most likely taken before the trip, on school grounds, which would explain why the principal was there. Emily nodded, though not entirely convinced. Glancing at the clock on the wall, she realized they had been talking for almost an hour. Veronica, I hate to do this, but I should probably get going. I want to visit Riley's grave, bring her some flowers, and tidy up a bit. I do that every year, she explained. Veronica, now known by her new name, reassured her by saying, Of course. Would you like some company? Jessica's grave is in the same area. Emily appreciated the offer, but noticed a hesitation in Veronica's eyes. That's kind of you, but I know you prefer to go with Derek later, and I'll be all right, Emily replied. Before leaving, she paused and asked, Would it be all right if I took that photo with me? The one with the school bus? Veronica considered for a moment, and then nodded, adding, Of course, but promise me you won't let this consume you. We can't afford to go down that rabbit hole again. Emily assured her friend she would be careful. As she left Veronica's house and made her way to the bus stop, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled upon something important. The image of Principal Lillian Brooks standing with the children before their ill-fated trip burned in her mind. A puzzle piece that didn't quite fit with the story she had been told for the past 27 years. Waiting for the bus that would take her to town to buy flowers from her local favorite florist, Emily found herself torn between the desire to uncover the truth and the fear of reopening old wounds. The sky grew darker, threatening rain much like the storm of emotions brewing within her, and she silently prayed that the rain would hold off until she had finished her visit to the cemetery, allowing her this one day to honor her daughter's memory in peace. Emily sat on the bus, lost in thought as it made its way through the familiar streets toward the town center. Clutching the photo tightly to her chest, she noted how the rain continued to pour steadily against the pavement outside, even though at least the wind had settled. Her mind whirled with thoughts and questions, especially after her encounter with Principal Brooks, which had left her with more doubts than answers. She could not shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As the bus navigated the rain-slicked streets, Emily pulled out her phone hoping for a notification, a missed call, or anything, but the screen remained blank, with no reply from the police officer. When her stop came into view, Emily disembarked and stepped out into a light drizzle. Just down the street was the florist shop, its colorful display of flowers a stark contrast to the gray day. Approaching the shop, Emily paused under the awning of a nearby building, hoping the rain would let up, and hesitated, debating whether to call the officer again, wondering if it would make any difference after her conversation with the principal. She doubted she would get anything new, as the officer would probably just echo what she had already heard. With a quiet sigh, she slipped her phone back into her bag. Perhaps Veronica was right. Maybe she was simply reopening old wounds for nothing. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to push it aside, the image of the young woman in Principal Brooks' house and the principal's nervous behavior continued to nag at her, leaving her with an unsettling feeling. Deciding that she had waited long enough, Emily took a deep breath and made a run for the floor shop, holding her purse over her head as a makeshift umbrella. The cold rain clung to her skin, seeping through her clothes, yet she barely noticed. She simply had to cross the street, even if it meant getting a little wet. Once inside the shop, the soft chime of the door's bell announced her arrival, and the warm, fragrant air enveloped her, the scent of fresh flowers mingling with the delicate aroma of roses. The florist, now known as Olivia Grant, greeted her warmly. I was wondering if we'd see you today. Emily managed a small smile and replied, Hello, Olivia. Yes, I'm here for my usual order. As Olivia began to gather the flowers, Emily scanned the shop selection. The variety seemed less extensive than in previous years, and she couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. Noticing Emily's expression, Olivia explained apologetically, I'm sorry we don't have as much variety this year. The weather has been unpredictable, and it's affected our suppliers. Emily nodded in understanding, saying, It's all right, Olivia. I'm sure we can still put together something beautiful for Riley. While Olivia continued to gather the flowers, the door's bell chimed again. Emily turned and saw Veronica and her husband Derek entering the shop. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Emily saw surprise and then concern flash across Veronica's face. Veronica approached her friend warmly. I thought you'd have gone to the florist earlier. Is everything all right? Emily hesitated, unsure how much to share about her impromptu visit to Principal Brooks' house, and finally said, I got a bit sidetracked, but it's good to see you both again. Derek shook Emily's hand warmly, adding, "It's good to see you too, Emily. How are you holding up?" Before Emily could answer, Olivia returned with an armful of flowers and said, "Here you are, Mrs. Summers. Would you like to arrange them yourself, as usual?" Emily nodded gratefully. "Yes, thank you, Olivia. I'll do that." As Emily began arranging the flowers, carefully selecting each stem and placing it with deliberate care, Veronica and Derek chose their own bouquets for the grave of another lost child. The shop was quiet except for the soft rustling of paper and the occasional murmur of conversation between the couple. Emily found herself lost in thought as her hands moved almost of their own accord to create a beautiful arrangement. The familiar task soothed her, allowing her mind to wander back to her recent encounter with Principal Brooks. When she finished tying a ribbon around the bouquet, Emily glanced up to see Veronica watching her with a mixture of affection and concern, softly saying, "That's beautiful, Emily. Riley would have loved it." Tears prickled at Emily's eyes at the mention of her daughter's name as she managed to say, "Thank you. I hope so." The three of them then made their way to the counter to pay for their flowers, while Olivia carefully wrapped Veronica's bouquet. Emily studied her friend's face, noticing not only a deep sadness and weight of grief, but also a calm acceptance that she admired. Suddenly, with gentle urgency, Emily said, "There's something I need to tell you about today." Veronica turned to her, curiosity mingling with concern. "What is it?" Emily took a deep breath and said, "After I left your house, I went to see Principal Brooks." Veronica's eyes widened in surprise. "You did what? Why?" Before Emily could explain further, Olivia handed them their wrapped bouquets, saying, "Here you are, ladies. I hope these bring you some comfort today." Emily and Veronica thanked her, and as they turned to leave the shop, Emily could feel the weight of Veronica's questioning gaze. She knew she owed her friend an explanation, but was unsure how to put her suspicions into words without sounding as if she were chasing ghosts. Stepping out onto the sidewalk, where the rain had finally ceased and left behind a fresh, clean scent in the air, Derek suggested, "Let's all go to the cemetery together." Emily found herself nodding in agreement as they walked toward Derek's car. In that moment, she realized she would have to share with Veronica what she had learned, or thought she had learned, even if a small part of her wondered whether she was ready to face the potential consequences of digging up the past once again. Settled into Derek's car, the atmosphere grew thick with unspoken questions as they drove through the familiar streets toward the cemetery. The quiet hum of the engine and the gentle patter of residual rain set a reflective tone. Turning in her seat to face Veronica with an expression that blended concern and curiosity, Emily spoke softly. "Veronica, why did you go to see Principal Brooks? What were you hoping to find?" Clutching the bouquet of flowers in her lap, as if drawing strength from their familiar comfort, Emily continued in a measured tone. "I couldn't shake the feeling. Something wasn't right about that class photo, the one with the school bus we looked at earlier." Her brow furrowed as she recalled every detail, every nuance of that image that had stirred so many questions in her heart. Veronica's gaze dropped momentarily. Then she replied, "It was taken at the school before the trip, wasn't it?" Although at first she had said it was during the trip, she had quickly corrected herself to affirm that it was indeed before, as if to conceal a secret that lay just beneath the surface. Emily's voice grew more animated as she explained, "When I arrived at her house, there was a young woman there, someone I'd never seen before, and the principal seemed nervous, as if she didn't want that woman to know what we were discussing." In that quiet moment, Derek exchanged a thoughtful look with Veronica, a silent conversation passing between them that Emily couldn't quite decipher. After a pause that felt as if it stretched out for an eternity, Veronica said in a gentle yet firm tone, "I understand the need to find answers. Believe me, I do. But we've been down this road before. Remember 3 years ago, when you thought you'd found a connection between the bus driver and that cold case in Oregon?" Emily's cheeks flushed with the memory of weeks spent chasing what had turned out to be a false lead, a clue that had meant so much at the time, but ultimately led nowhere. "This is different," she insisted softly, even though a small part of her wondered if she was perhaps trying to convince herself as much as her friends. The car fell silent for a few moments as they continued along the road toward the cemetery, the scenery shifting gradually from the familiar urban landscape to more rural surroundings, with patches of blue peeking through the receding clouds. As they neared the cemetery gates, Derek broke the silence by saying, "Emily, we care about you. We don't want to see you hurt again by false hope." His words, simple yet profound, resonated deep within her. With a lump forming in her throat, she replied in a hushed tone, "I know. I can't help the feeling that Riley and the others deserve more than just acceptance. They deserve the truth." Veronica reached back and squeezed Emily's hand in gentle solidarity. "They do," she agreed softly. "But sometimes the truth is that we may never know everything, and that's something we have to learn to live with." After parking the car, the three of them stepped out into the cool, damp air. The cemetery's solemn quiet was punctuated only by the soft rustling of leaves and the distant murmurs of memories. With measured steps, they made their way toward the graves where the lost children rested, a testament to a painful past that still haunted every heart. Each step on the soft ground carried with it both the familiar weight of grief and a renewed determination to seek answers. Emily paused before reaching Riley's tombstone, her heart heavy as she knelt to gently place the bouquet of flowers at its base. The petals, still fresh with the morning dew, added a subtle burst of color against the gray stone. Running her fingers reverently over the engraved name, Emily felt a mix of solace and sorrow. She recalled every precious moment: Riley's laughter, the way she used to tug at her sleeve when she wanted attention, and the bittersweet memory of their last goodbye. Tears welled in her eyes as she allowed herself to grieve freely, each tear a testament to the unyielding love and unending pain of loss. Before joining Veronica and Derek at another nearby grave, Emily sensed something stirring in the distance. Her eyes caught sight of a familiar figure, a young woman standing solemnly near a headstone among those of the missing children. This young woman, whose presence exuded both quiet resilience and lingering sorrow, was none other than the mysterious visitor from Principal Brooks' house. Without a second thought, Emily gently patted Veronica's arm and murmured, "I'll be right back," her voice barely above a whisper. Approaching the young woman, Emily's heart pounded with anticipation and trepidation. The visitor, whose eyes were red from tears and whose shoulders trembled as if burdened by a secret too heavy to bear alone, turned in startled recognition when Emily addressed her softly, "Excuse me." The young woman quickly composed herself, wiping away her tears, and replied in a voice that was fragile yet resolute, "We meet again." Emily's steady gaze met hers, and in that moment, the layers of mystery began to peel away as she said, "I think I saw you at Principal Brooks' house earlier." The young woman's eyes lowered, shifting uncomfortably as if she longed to retreat into the shadows of her own memories. "I'm sorry," she murmured, as if to excuse her presence, but then added in a voice barely above a whisper, "I come here every year on this day to grieve." Emily nodded in understanding, her own heart aching with a familiar, indescribable sorrow. "So do I," she replied softly. Then, in a tentative inquiry, she asked, "Who are you grieving for? Were you related to one of the students who went missing 27 years ago?" The young woman hesitated, her lips parting slightly before she pressed them together. After a moment that seemed to stretch into an eternity, she gave a slow, reluctant nod. Emily's eyes drifted toward a small framed photograph placed near a nearby grave, a photograph so blurred by age that only the outline of a young girl's face could be discerned. Noticing Emily's gaze, the young woman swiftly reached down, clutching her own framed photograph tightly to her chest, and softly said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to invade your privacy. You must have truly loved and missed your sister." A flicker of recognition and empathy passed between them. Preparing to leave, Emily turned, but the young woman called out in an uncertain yet firm tone, "Wait, why did he go to see Principal Brooks' house earlier?" The unexpected question caught Emily off guard. Turning fully to face her, she studied the young woman's expression, one that conveyed not just curiosity, but a deeper, cautious pain. "I was just asking about the day of the school trip," Emily explained carefully. "I want to know if she was there when the students left or if she went with them." Reaching into her purse, Emily pulled out the slightly crinkled photograph that Veronica had shown her earlier and extended it toward the young woman. "My friend Veronica showed me this photo. I had never seen it before, and it confused me. I didn't remember Principal Lillian being there that day." For a long moment, the young woman's grip on her own photo tightened as she stared at the image, her eyes welling with conflicting emotions. Finally, her voice, tinged with affection and heartbreak, broke the silence. "Riley was such an ass." The tone was not one of hatred, but rather a bittersweet warmth that tugged at Emily's heart. Startled by the name, Emily asked in urgency, "Did you know Riley?" The young woman hesitated, her posture momentarily defensive, as if caught off guard by the unexpected familiarity of the conversation. After a brief, tense pause, the young woman's eyes darted toward the framed photograph she still clutched against her chest. Emily, her voice firm yet compassionate, gently pressed on, "You know it is you. It's 100% you." At that, the young woman's shoulders slumped in defeat, and she murmured in a nearly inaudible whisper, "You don't want to know who I am." Emily stepped closer and reassured her. "It's okay. You don't need to be scared. Are you one of the survivors?" A flash of panic crossed the young woman's eyes as she quickly shook her head. "No, I think you're mistaken," she protested, but Emily's gentle persistence and the warmth in her voice convinced her otherwise. "No," Emily replied softly yet firmly. "It is you. Please, I beg you. After all these years, I have never been able to understand my daughter's disappearance. It's been eating me alive. I come here every year to honor her memory, and I need answers." In that charged moment, the young woman's eyes flickered with a mixture of emotions. "You're right," she finally whispered. I'm one of the missing students, a survivor." The revelation struck Emily like a jolt of lightning, her heart racing as she gasped in disbelief. Who? Who?" Emily stammered, struggling to process the weight of the confession. The young woman, now known as Avery Monroe instead of Audrey Whitman, confirmed with quiet determination, "My name is Avery Monroe." A flood of memories, both painful and poignant, surged through Emily as she recalled seeing Avery's name etched on a tombstone during countless visits, a haunting reminder of a tragedy that had marred their lives for decades. "Did your family know you were alive?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with equal parts hope and sorrow. Avery shook her head slowly, her expression heavy with the burden of secrets. "No, that's why I come to the grave later in the day, when my parents always come in the morning," she explained softly. Unable to hold back her curiosity any longer, Emily gently inquired, "Why didn't you come back home?" Avery's eyes filled with tears as she replied, "I'm too broken," her voice trembling with the weight of a long, painful story that she could barely begin to tell. Emily, moved by the young woman's vulnerability, softly added, "You don't have to share it all with me, but please, please, turn yourself into the police. Give them your testimony and evidence." Avery's reaction was immediate and vehement. Her eyes flashed with defiance and fear. "No, no, no," she cried, echoing the words once spoken by Principal Lillian Brooks, who had long discouraged any further inquiry. "I trusted her," Avery confessed, her voice cracking as she admitted. "I was the only one who understood her pain." Emily's heart ached at the raw honesty in Avery's tone. "Avery, pain is living in the unknown, and we are all already in pain," she murmured gently. "But your testimony could help us. You would be saving us all, providing closure by revealing the truth." Avery looked up, her eyes searching Emily's face for sincerity. "Really?" she whispered, and Emily, her heart brimming with compassion, nodded fervently. "Yes, you be helping the victim's family." "Please, Avery," she pleaded with a desperate urgency. "After all these years, we finally have a chance at closure. We can reopen the case and finally learn what happened." As Avery's trembling hands reached for her phone, A surge of determination overtook her. "You're right," she finally said, her voice growing steadier. "I've wrestled with this decision for a long time, but Lillian always discouraged me, and I believed she had her reasons. But now, seeing you here, I'll call the police." With that, Avery's resolve strengthened as she prepared to share everything she had kept hidden for decades. A moment later, as police sirens pierced the quiet air in the distance, Avery's expression shifted from fear to sadness. "Please, if you love Riley and the others, you owe it to them to tell the truth," Emily urged, her tone firm yet compassionate. In that charged instant, as Veronica and Derek looked on with expressions of both confusion and determination, Avery hesitated, then finally nodded. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll talk." But at the station, before anyone could react further, 2 police officers arrived, their presence adding an air of urgency and finality to the scene. They approached Avery, confirming her identity and gently escorting her to the squad car. As she followed, Emily, Veronica, and Derek exchanged glances filled with a mix of relief, apprehension, and hope that this revelation might finally begin to mend the gaping wounds of the past. After Avery was escorted away by the officers, a hushed command resounded from the authorities. "We need everyone to come with us to the station. We can't have any disturbances here." Avery, her face pale but determined, nodded and followed the officers to their squad car. Meanwhile, Emily, Veronica, and Derek gathered and walked to their own car, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Once inside the vehicle, Emily's voice trembled as she began to recount every detail to Veronica and Derek. "You won't believe what just happened," she said, her tone shaking with disbelief as she described the revelation about Avery's confession as a survivor and how it all felt like a sinister puzzle with missing pieces. Derek frowned deeply, asking, "This is all so strange. Why would the principal keep something like that from us?" Emily admitted softly, "I don't know, but it feels like there's something deeper at play. Whatever truth Avery holds must be significant enough that it could put Lillian in danger." Upon arriving at the police station, the trio stepped inside into an atmosphere thick with tension and uncertainty. Emily spotted Officer Jensen, the very officer she had tried calling earlier, and he immediately approached them with an apologetic tone, saying, "I'm sorry I couldn't take your call earlier. I was tied up with an urgent case." Frustration and urgency mingled in Emily's heart as she insisted, "Officer, you need to take this seriously. Avery has confessed that she's a survivor. She's finally ready to talk." The officer's demeanor shifted as he replied, "If that's true, we will reopen the case," and he then motioned for Avery to follow him into an interview room. Left behind in a sterile waiting area, Emily, Veronica, and Derek sat anxiously as they strained to catch snippets of the muffled conversation. One officer mentioned that Lillian Brooks' statement was ready and that she had confessed the whole truth. Soon enough, the officer reemerged and beckoned the trio to join him in the interrogation room, where their hearts raced in anticipation. Inside the interview room, Avery sat with an expression blending relief and apprehension, a visible tapestry of emotions forged through years of silent suffering. The officer wasted no time in stating, in a steady yet somber voice, "Principal Brooks has confessed during her interrogation. She admitted that she was the one who organized the entire class trip and framed the teacher, Mr. Gregory, to take the fall for what happened. She was under immense pressure, burdened by debts she couldn't pay, and dangerous loan sharks threatened her family." Emily's breath caught as the officer continued. "It appears that the trip, meant to be for Big Bend Park, was sabotaged. Principal Brooks conspired with the kidnappers, resulting in the driver's death. The body couldn't be found, as you already know from our initial investigation. Then they abducted the teacher and the children, transporting them to a border area in Mexico, where all the kids were trafficked and smuggled into another country. The female students were targeted for exploitation by Mexican gangsters, and the male students were sold overseas for child labor." The officer's words fell heavy, and Emily felt her stomach twist in knots as she tried to comprehend the horrifying reality. She glanced at Veronica and Derek, whose faces had turned ashen as they processed the terrible revelations. Avery, with her eyes cast downward, finally spoke in a trembling voice. I was the only one who made it out alive. 12 years ago, I managed to escape from the man who had purchased me and forced me into exploitation. Even after I got away, I was too traumatized and mentally destroyed to face my parents. Her gaze shifted between Emily and Derek. A mix of shame and pain etched across her features. That's when I somehow connected with Principal Brooks. She helped me build a new life, paid for my apartment, and covered my living expenses, but in return, I couldn't tell anyone the truth. I believed it would only add to the distress of the victims' families. Emily's heart pounded as she processed Avery's confession. With a quivering voice, she asked, "What about the other children? Did anyone else survive? What happened to Riley?" Avery shook her head slowly, replying in a nearly inaudible whisper, "I honestly don't know about the others. We were mostly split up, but I remember that Riley and another girl, now known as Jessica, didn't make it. Riley died the day of the kidnapping from an overdose they gave her, and Jessica was next. They didn't get the dosage right for her either." At these words, both Emily and Veronica broke down in tears, their grief crashing over them like a tidal wave. Avery, her voice cracking with guilt, murmured, "I'm so sorry. This is what I fear the most. Principal Lillian was right." Emily, wiping away her tears, shook her head firmly and said, "You did the right thing, Avery. Yes, this is painful, but we finally have closure. We can start healing now." The police then spoke up with cautious optimism. "With this new evidence, we can reopen the case, and thanks to you, Avery, we might be able to locate some of the other students." Emily's heart raced as she asked softly, "What happens now?" The officer replied, "We're reopening the case immediately. We are filing charges against Lillian Brooks and have already contacted authorities in Mexico to pursue this new information. Avery, we recognize the immense trauma you've endured, and while we won't hold you accountable for withholding information, we are offering you witness protection, as it's essential now that the investigation into the trafficking ring begins. We anticipate that they may attempt to locate you again." The officer paused, his expression softening as he looked at Emily, Veronica, and Derek. "I know this must be incredibly difficult for you, to have hope rekindled after all these years only for the truth to emerge now," he said. Emily nodded, tears welling up as she whispered, "At least now we know. After all these years, we finally know what happened to our children. The other victims' families deserve to know this too." The police assured everyone that they would reach out to the families of the other victims, now that the case was being reopened. As the tense atmosphere began to ease, Avery emerged from the interview room. Though her face was pale and drawn, there was a subtle lightness in her expression, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said softly to Emily, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing me, for helping me find the courage to come forward." In that moment, Emily embraced Avery, feeling a deep connection to the young woman who had survived unimaginable horrors. "Thank you for telling the truth," Emily whispered. "You've given us all a chance at closure." Later, as Emily, Veronica, and Derek stepped out of the police station into the fading light of day, they experienced a strange mixture of emotions. There was, of course, the grief, a fresh wave of sorrow for the daughter they had lost. But there was also a sense of peace, a chapter finally closing after being left open for far too long. Standing in the parking lot, with the first stars beginning to appear in the sky, Emily spoke steadily. "We honor our children's memory by making sure justice is served and by helping Avery build the new life she was denied for so long." On the drive home, Emily felt a profound shift within herself. The grief remained, a constant companion after all these years, but alongside it now burned a renewed sense of purpose. She was determined to see this case through to the very end, not only for Riley and Jessica, but for all the children lost that day, and for Avery, who had survived against all odds. In that solemn, poignant moment, Emily silently vowed to keep fighting until the full truth was known and those responsible were held accountable. The road ahead would be long and undoubtedly painful. But for the first time in 27 years, Emily felt that she was finally on the path to answers, and perhaps eventually to a kind of peace that had once seemed forever out of reach. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more great stories like this one. Share this video with your friends and family, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for our next video, and check out others you might have missed. See you next time.